See if we have a live on this Thursday. Everybody, I'm assuming everybody's good to go with their locomotion stuff.
You want us to turn like the graph paper stuff in?
Yeah, well, we need to talk a little bit about, we can talk about that on Thursday or whatever, once we're out there, whatever, exactly what format it should take when you turn it in. Is anybody having difficulty with their locomotion stuff? Sort of at a stopping point?
I think we pretty well finished it up.
Yeah. Is Mr. Zollner still, anybody know where he is, what he's up to? He's sort of fallen off the face of the earth. Okay, well, I will send out an email concerning Glad if we decide to go out in the field. It looks like the weather's going to be glorious. We can get out there. All you need to do is, I mean, it's just a 5-minute drive over there, so it's no big deal. And all you need to do is be prepared for walking through the woods a little bit is all. Okay, so. All right. What I want to do today is talk. There are 3 major topics that you need to take care of before we're done with this semester. We need to talk about the evolution of birds. We need to talk about thermoregulation and water balance. And we need to talk about the evolution of mammals. I'm confused. Okay, that's that one. And, all right, let's flip these puppies around. How's that? Okay. You guys are here, you don't need this stuff, but in the event that Cody still exists. The lamp has reached the end of its useful life. Great. $500 down the toilet, just like that. All right, let's talk about the evolution of birds, and then we'll start talking about the evolution of mammals. Once we've done that, then we can talk about temperature regulation, and water balance, water regulation, which we don't think about much living here in the Midwest, but if you've ever been out west, you understand pretty quickly how important both water and temperature are. So much of the biology of the western U.S. is based on temperature and water. It's kind of awesome what animals do and how they handle those particular problems. So let's talk about evolution of birds. And we've talked a little bit about that already. Specifically, we've talked about sort of the origin of flight and the whole business about the pubic bones and things of that sort. And I just want to very quickly go through some of the key aspects of the evolution of the aves. We're doing this a little bit out of sequence. In reality, we should be talking about the evolution of mammals before we talk about the evolution of birds, because birds are a much newer group than are the mammals. The mammals evolved before birds. How do I know that? Just based on basic biology, how do I know that mammals came first? Well, I know that because mammals have sebaceous glands. So our bodies are covered in sweat glands. Reptiles don't have sweat glands. The number of sebaceous glands in reptiles is 0. Okay, so they don't have the ability to sweat. Everything about the reptile is designed to minimize water loss. Reptiles are all about that solid, transition from water to land. They completely divorce themselves from water. So they're not losing water by sweating. Mammals, on the other hand, do that. Well, the only other group of vertebrates that has lots and lots and lots of sebaceous glands are the amphibians, right? Because they're still breathing through their skin. So it's obvious that the origin of mammals comes very, very, very early in the reptilian radiation, before they've lost all of their sweat glands, or all their sebaceous glands. So mammals come out very early, birds come off very late in the reptilian radiation, and birds have only one sebaceous gland, and that's the uroptychial gland, which is at the base of the tail, and that's the gland that they use when they are preening their feathers. There are other similarities between birds and reptiles, and the first one that comes to mind, obviously, is the fact that birds have but a single occipital condyle. So the skull articulates with the vertebral column through that single occipital condyle. Now it's two bones that are bumped right up, the two occipital bones, are right there in the same place. But the point is that the condyle is, even though it's made up of several bones, it is one solid articular surface. That's different from what it is in mammals. You have two occipital condyles. Well, that single occipital condyle in amphibians, they have two. So, right, it's this weird sort of transition from 2 to 1. And then for us, back to 2. Well, although if we come very early, right, the amphibians have 2, we have 2. All right, so there's that single occipital condyle. They have, the reptiles have 5 cervical vertebrae. I think birds probably have 5 cervical vertebrae as well. Mammals have 7, right? The big difference, though, that the sort of really cool thing happens in the ear. Here's what the ear looks like in a mammal. Here's what the ear looks like in a reptile and in a bird. In a bird, there is but a single inner ear ossicle called the columella. In mammals, what happens is we have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. All right? So for us, it's set up a little bit differently. The columella here is the same as the stapes there. So we've added 2 additional inner ear ossicles in the mammals. Now, what does that mean, right? Sound is obviously very important for birds. Not so much for reptiles. If you think about the sounds that a reptile makes, well, it's not a very rich acoustic repertoire, right? They don't sing, they don't vocalize really. They grunt and they hiss. The hissing that you hear in snakes or in reptiles is really nothing more than them evacuating the air out of their lungs. That's all, right? It's nothing more than that. But in birds, sound is crucial because they're using sound, they're using song to attract mates, right, to establish territories. The acoustic repertoire of birds is crazy. And to convince yourself of that, in the museum there I have tens of thousands of hours of recordings from the Middle Mississippi National Wildlife Refuge of bird songs. We were recording over an entire 9-month period, all the acoustic vocalizations by birds and frogs coming out of the Middle Mississippi National Wildlife Refuge. And you start listening to those, and you can begin to pick out individual species. Yeah, okay, that's the pileated woodpecker. Yep, that's a cerulean warbler. Yep, there's an Acadian flycatcher. They all have these unique songs, right? And those songs they use to say, hey, this is this species, hey, I'm looking for a babe, or hey, I'm looking for a stud muffin, hey, let's make a nest, hey, get off my territory. There's a lot of information that's being transmitted in those songs. So the fact they can hear that and process that with simply a single inner ear bone is kind of cool. Mammals have 3. And what that tells you right off the bat is that the acoustic repertoire of a mammal is going to be much richer because there is a mechanical advantage that you derive from having this setup of inner ear ossicles, and the sorts of sounds that you can hear as a mammal are far greater than what you can hear as a bird. If you think about our vocal repertoire compared to a bird's, it's pretty extreme. And it's not just for us as primates, it's all sorts of other mammals as well that use sound in all sorts of interesting and complex ways. Coyotes, dingoes, right? New Guinea singing dogs have this bizarre vocal repertoire, and they're communicating as though they, were were established in Western music, right? They sing these triads, these chords which are almost perfectly in tune, and they're able to do it because they have this sort of crazy kind of setup. So the question that I want to draw, or the point that I want to draw your attention to is this question: where does the incus and the malleus come from? And you already know the answer to that. Well, that's the quadrate and the articular bones. And if you look, and this is the important part of all of this, right? You want to understand why we think that birds are really nothing more than reptiles. You have only to look at the jaws. So in a mammal jaw, the entire jaw is made up simply of the dentary bone. In a reptile, you have the dentary bone, the surangular, the coronoid, the angular, the articular bones, the splenial, which is on the other side. There are 7 bones in the jaw of a reptile. There are 7 bones in the jaw of a bird. Notice, in a reptile, the only bone in the lower jaw that carries teeth is the dentary bone. That's why it's called the dentary bone, because it's the bone with the teeth. Here, it's the dentary bone. It's the bone with the teeth. All the other bones have gone away. It's not that they fused, it's that they are gone. Well, the articular here goes up into the inner ear, okay, and becomes the malleus. The quadrate becomes the incus. The stapes is the columella. So those bones have shifted from here, and you'll recall earlier in the semester I made a big deal about sound conduction and sound pathways, and the fact that the otic part of the brain is at the back, right? This thing right here is already involved, even now is involved in transmitting sound. And of course, in the mammal, it's still involved in transmitting sound, it's just moved its position. So one question that you could ask is, why? So in biology, there are 2 kinds of questions. There are proximate questions and ultimate questions. The proximate question is how? How did this happen? How did it work, right? What were the steps? The ultimate question is why. Why did it happen? Not how did it happen, but why did it happen? So the question is, why make this transition from having 7 bones in reptiles and birds to having but a single bone in mammals? Now you'll notice one thing about the birds don't have any teeth. Archaeopteryx had teeth, right? But birds have no teeth. Well, lots of animals don't have teeth, right? Even some lizards. You look at, not lizards, but rhynchocephalians, right? The sphenodontid doesn't have any upper teeth attached to the premaxilla, right? It's a horny beak, just like you would see in turtles. So what's the advantage of having a single bone making up the jaw rather than 7 bones? Harder to break, okay? All those things right there are weak spots. Those are all weak spots, okay? The weakest part of any construction is the joints. So by getting rid of all of that, by having a single bone, you have a stronger structure. Now, importantly, if you look at this thing right here, we refer to that as the angular process. It's a reflected surface. So the angular process on your dentary bone, you can feel it right there. It's where your jaw makes that nice little angle back there. It flares out just a little bit like that. And it does that because the masseter muscles are hooking up there. So when it flares out, you have more surface area for the masseter muscles. And the masseter muscles are the muscles that are coming from here and going to the side of the face, and they're the ones that enable you to move your jaw forward, right? And also they help in closing the jaw. On the inside, you have the pterygoid muscles, which are going from the inside up to the pterygoid processes right next to your epiglottis. Well, look, here's the angular process right there. There's the angular bone. So there are muscles which are going from there up to the side of the face in this guy as well. There is another cool difference between most mammals and birds and reptiles, and that is that the red blood cells in birds and reptiles are nucleated. In mammals, they are enucleated. They don't have a nucleus. Well, there is one exception. Anybody know what the exception is? Camels. Camels have nuclei in their blood cells. Camels are effing weird. Why are camels so weird? What's so bizarre about camels? Anybody know? Aside from the fact that they spit. Who are the camels? Don't give me this shit. Don't try and tell me that you don't know what a camel is. What the hell is a camel?
Desert animal?
Pardon?
Desert animal?
Yeah, some of them are in the desert, some of them aren't. You bullshit. You guys don't know what a camel is?
Yeah, humps.
They have humps. Good. There are two kinds of camels.
Dromedary.
There are dromedaries, which have a single hump, and Bactrian camels, which have two humps. Okay? At the St. Louis Zoo, they have Bactrian camels. What's the hump all about? So why are camels famous? Lawrence of Arabia, right? The movie. Why are camels famous?
They good carrying stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to sit on a camel unless it's a Bactrian camel, and then it's kind of an odd, weird seat, you know, give you sort of a crotch rub as you're riding that thing. It's not all that comfy.
I mean, people use them a lot for transport. Yeah.
As pack animals in the desert, why are they good animals to be in the desert? I'm trying to get at why they have red blood cells with nuclei.
Is it like they don't get as much oxygen?
All right, so now we're getting someplace. The fact that your red blood cells don't have nuclei means there's more room on that cell. It can have a different shape. It can have more surface area, which means that it can bind with more oxygen. So your blood cells can carry more oxygen than the blood cells in a reptile. Okay? Why is that important?
Cellular respiration.
Well, what's different about you and a reptile in terms of your metabolic rate?
So much greater.
It's much higher, right? You're burning through oxygen at a phenomenal rate compared to a reptile. All right? Well, that's obviously not all there is to the story, because there's the camel, and the camel does have nuclei, and the camel is a mammal and does have a higher metabolic rate. But there is a fundamental difference. If you were to measure the body temperature of a camel, what would you discover?
Pretty low.
Can be, but it can also be pretty high. So the camel can allow its body temperature to drop into the upper 80s, and it allows its body temperature to climb up into the low 100s. So it has something called temperature lability. Its temperature fluctuates. Why is that good if you live in the desert?
Keeps you from overheating.
Because if you allow your body temperature to fluctuate, that means you're no longer wasting energy trying to regulate your body temperature. You allow your body temperature to go up and down. Go down, you don't go ahead and shiver. Fine, let it go down a little bit. It goes up, you're not going to start panting and wasting water. So by allowing your body temperature to fluctuate, your oxygen demand actually goes down. Okay? The other cool thing about camels, if you watch how a camel behaves in the desert, there it is, out in the middle of the Sahara, standing there. It has these giant humps on its back, filled with, no, fat, filled with fat. And now it's standing there, and the hair on the top of the animal is thick and coarse and hollow. And the hair on its belly is thin. And when the camel gets hot, there's no shade, there's no place to go. It stands there in the middle of the sand, and it'll stand stock still, directly in the path of the sun, creating a little shady patch in the sand right below it. And it'll stand there for 20 minutes, allowing that shady patch of sand to cool down. That sand in the sun might be 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It cools down in the shade, drops the temperature down to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And it then lays down, drops its belly with the thin hair, and makes that belly come in contact with the cool sand. And it's now dumping heat from its body to the cool sand. So what's the hump all about?
Shape.
Is it so they can go a long time without food?
Yeah. It's fat, which is an insulating layer, so it's keeping the heat from getting to the core of the body. People say what camels do is they store water in the hump. They don't. In fact, you can take the fat that's there and extract water from it. You can convert it into water, right? There's a lot of hydrogen and a lot of oxygen in that fat. You can convert it to water, but if you look at the water balance, the water that you spend trying to extract water from the fat is higher than what you actually get in return. So it'd be like going to the casino each time, buying $50 in chips and winning $40. And you just keep playing. You're losing, you're losing, you're losing. That's what happens to the camel. So it's not about getting water. Now, one thing that camels are able to do is they allow their bodies to dehydrate. They allow their blood to become extremely thick. They can tolerate that very thick blood. Their blood pressure goes through the roof, and which you cannot do. And they then, when they come to a water supply, they can drink 50 liters of water in just a few minutes. Okay, which is something you can't do either. If you drink too much water in one setting, you kill yourself. Okay? So the fact they have nucleated blood cells, why have nuclei in your blood cells? What do you accomplish by doing that? What's the purpose of the nucleus?
Store the DNA, which is
Store the DNA, protein synthesis, cell division, all of that good stuff. Right? All right. So we've already talked, back to birds, we've already talked about the fact that birds and reptiles have these allantoid chorionic eggs, right? And what that means is they require internal fertilization. It also means, and if you look at birds, they need to have some kind of a way of getting out of this egg if it has this hard calcified shell. And in fact, they have something referred to as the egg tooth on the tip of the beak, which they will use to break the egg open. In terms of maternal investment is via the yolk. So we, as humans, have maternal investment via the placenta. They have maternal investment via the placenta to develop the yolk, but once the shell is calcified, right, all the maternal investment is locked up there. And of course, in birds, once the young is born, the parents are going to feed it for an extended period of time. So maternal investment is high in birds. An important component of birds is feathers, and this is where there's this huge controversy about the evolution of birds. Feathers come in two varieties. There are the downy feathers, and then there are the flight feathers. In order for a feather to work as a flight feather, it must be asymmetrical. So the vein of the feather can't run straight down the middle, it has to go off to one side. If it goes off to one side, the shape of the wing, the shape of the feather is going to be like that. So there's the rib down the middle, which means that the bird can then take advantage of the Bernoulli principle in order to gain lift. The downy feathers are used for insulation. We've already had that discussion about what came first, fur, right, or the high metabolic rate, the insulation or the high metabolic rate, and we don't know, right, because it doesn't seem to work. A lot of the dinosaur fossils that have feathers that are coming out of China, when you look at the feathers either look like this or like this. So they are not flight feathers. What is a feather? A feather is made up of keratin. What are reptile scales made up of? Keratin. What is your hair made up of? Keratin. Hair, scales, feathers, it's all the same stuff. They're all made out of keratin. They are all modified scales. That's all. Okay? Now, maybe, I don't know if people buy down anymore. Down got really expensive there. It used to be if you were going to go backpacking, you know, in the Sierras or something, you made sure you had the best possible down bags and all that sort of stuff because they have these wonderful insulative qualities. Of course, they're worthless if they get wet. But down, true down, is, you know, goose down is amazing insulative material. It's fantastic up until it gets wet. Okay? And birds have lots of down feathers. If you look, I mean, you look at little chickadees and things like juncos here in the wintertime, it'll be well below freezing, and the little juncos are out there underneath your feet or picking at the seeds, and they're all puffed up. That's because these feathers are standing on end, and all the down feathers underneath are fluffed up, and they have this wonderful insulative layer. Now, we already made the point that modern birds don't have teeth. Fine, neither do turtles, right? And there's this cool thing that goes on with birds, and that is the flight engine is solid. So when I talk about the flight engine, what I mean is this keeled sternum, all the ribs, the pelvic girdle, everything is rock solid. There's no movement in that structure at all. And the consequence of that is that when the birds fly, all the muscles are operating against the solid unit. There's no movement in the body. It's a rigid structure, which makes it possible for the aerodynamics to work. If you look at the bones, right, the bones are hollow, they are pneumatic. When you look at dinosaur bones are not pneumatic. So dinosaur bones don't look anything at all like this. Well, what this does is it maintains the structural integrity of the bone, but at the same time it retains its strength, but reduces the mass of the bone. And that's important. If you want to fly, you need to have as little mass as you possibly can. The forelimbs are modified for flight. So there's the humerus, there's the radius and the ulna, and there are the digits right there. Most of the wing is simply feathers. So that's another important thing. All the mass for flight is in close to the body. All the weight is in close to the body. Most of the wing is just feathers. So there's reduction in elements, there's a reduction in complexity. It's a simple design, and it works remarkably well. Now, the other important thing here about birds is there is a total reduction in mass, and the center of mass of the bird is low. So here's the center of mass right in here. The wings are coming off up there, so the mass of the bird is suspended below the wing. Exactly the same thing that you see in cheap beginner airplanes like Pipers and things of that sort. So if you were to go out and buy an airplane, learn to fly, right, you would go out and buy yourself a used Piper Cub or something of that sort. Cloth-bodied airplane, center of mass is suspended below the wing. Hang gliders, you're suspended below the wing, right? It's all about stability of design. Now, the interesting thing is that metabolic rates that are associated with flight in particular are high. And one of the interesting things in particular about that is when you start thinking about hummingbirds, right? They've got high metabolic rates. What kind of a food source do hummingbirds rely on? They're taking a food source which is high in calories. So they're feeding on sugar, they're feeding on nectar, things of that sort. They have to do that. Now think about what that means. If you're going to take in nectar, what's the consequence of feeding on nectar? It's a liquid and it's heavy. A lot of calories, but it's heavy. So what do? Let's think about an alternative. Let's think about bats. If a bat lands on the ground, what happens to the bat? Usually it dies, okay? In order to fly, most bats have to climb up and launch from an altitude to take off. There are some bats, however, that don't. Think, for example, of vampire bats. What do vampire bats feed on?
Blood.
Blood. From what?
Mammals.
Yeah, which mammals? Why are there so many vampire bats in Central America? Vampire bats are doing really well. The question is why?
The cattle.
Cattle. Okay? So what happens with the cattle just stand there, they're spending the night, they just stand in one place. The vampire bats land on the ground, walk up to the ankles of the cow, and their saliva, they have this little anesthetic in their saliva, so they just lick the cow a little bit on the ankle. The skin goes numb, they bite, and they just start licking up the blood. So they fill their bellies up with blood. So now this vampire bat has got to take off, and it's going to take off from the ground. So how do you do that? You have two problems. One, you just filled your belly with blood. What is blood like? So how many people here are German or have a German heritage? Great. So you like blood sausage, do you?
No.
But you know what it is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so your grandparents probably said, oh, you'll like this. This is great shit. Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. Okay. What do you feel like when you eat blood sausage? What does it do? Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you put it out of the table, feed it to the dog. Here, Fido. Okay. It's salty. Okay. It has. Your blood has a high osmotic concentration, right? It's 0.897 milliosmoles. It's concentrated stuff. So if you're eating a lot of blood sausage, you're going to get really thirsty. So here's this vampire bat that's just filled its belly with blood. So not only has he got a full belly, he's really heavy, and it's really salty, and now he's got to take off, and he can't climb a tree to take off, he's got to jump from the ground. So before he jumps, what he's going to do is he's going to clean out his GI tract. Well, his kidneys are working overtime, and his kidneys are like the kidneys in a desert animal. So the loops of Henle are really long. But what this guy is doing is he's processing that blood as quickly as he can to get rid of as much fluid as he possibly can. So even though he lives in the tropics, it's as though he lives in the desert because he has this high salt diet. So he's going to pee this stuff out, he's going to poop all, and after he's cleaned out his blood, then he's going to jump. And the reason he can jump is because he has really long thumbs, and he's using the thumbs like extensions to his arms to enable him to jump and take off. But first he's got to lighten the load, he's got to poop and pee, and then he's going to jump and fly. Well, what does a hummingbird do? If you ever watch a hummingbird, right, it comes to your feeder, it feeds, and then it'll sit there momentarily, lift its tail, it pees. And it's a clear liquid urine that it's producing. It's not like in other birds where you're getting uric acid crystals or urea. It's pretty dilute stuff that this guy is peeing out. And then when he flies, he's hauling ass, he flies as fast as he can from one flower to the next. And that's because in hummingbirds, if they go too long between meals, they starve to death. Okay, the metabolic rate is so high they can't afford to wait around. They have to get more calories quick, 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 quick. Unfortunately, the calories that they're taking in are high, right? They've got a high calorie diet. They're getting all that sugar in. They're doing just fine. At night, when they can't feed, they go into torpor. They drop the body temperature way the heck down so they're not burning any calories overnight. But it's an important component of being a bird, right? You have to feed that metabolic engine, and different birds have different ways of doing it. If you're small, the energetic cost of being alive is very high. If you're big, like a Canada goose, you're fine. My son lives out in Idaho Falls, and I go out there on a pretty regular basis to visit him. And in the winter, it'll be, like 6 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit or something like that. You're walking on the green belt in Idaho Falls, and there are all these effing Canada geese all over the place shitting frozen turds onto the sidewalk. They're everywhere. There's nothing for these guys to eat, but they're there, right? And they're making it through that winter. It's unbelievable. All right, so the deal with the bird is they don't have a diaphragm like you do. They cannot ventilate their lungs the way you do. You ventilate your lungs by contracting the diaphragm, pulling it up, exhaling, and then allowing the weight of your guts to drag it back down and inhale. They don't have that. Their chest cavity doesn't expand and contract. Instead, what they're doing is they have all of these air sacs, and they're cycling air through those air sacs. It's coming in like that, and then cycling back out like that. So the air streams are going right past one another like that, so they have a counter-current exchange system set up, so that they are able to retain moisture and heat in the air as they're exhaling, because the moist air, the dry air is coming in, the moist air is going out, and the moisture is recaptured by the dry air going in, so they're not dehydrating themselves excessively. Now, if you've ever watched birds in the summer, maybe you've been in the mountains and you've seen some egrets or something, or even if you go to the St. Louis Zoo, go into the aviary sometime and there's some cormorants in there. Look at the cormorants in the aviary in the summer, and they're standing there, and damn, it's hot. And that bird will be standing there, and his beak will be open, and it'll do this thing called gular fluttering. So its throat is vibrating. And what the bird is doing is bringing air just into here and then expelling it. It's not going down deep. It's moving air back and forth right here. And it's using the skin on its trachea to evaporate the air, or to evaporate the moisture off of its trachea. So it's sweating, basically, off its trachea. It doesn't have any sweat glands, but it's dehydrating the skin of its trachea in an effort to get rid of heat. So it's using the trachea as a heat exchange device. So the fact that it has these air sacs and it's cycling air through those means it doesn't have to expand its chest cavity. So it's able to ventilate the lungs very quickly without expanding its chest, which means it doesn't change its aerodynamics as it flies. So we can look at, all the different explanations or hypotheses for the origin of birds, right? Whether they are from the thecodons, the early archosaurs, whether they come from crocodilians or whether they're from the theropod dinosaurs. We're not going to go into all of that. there are all these synapomorphies between the theropods and the birds. The consensus is that birds are derived from the dinosaurs, but it's not unanimous. There are still a lot of people that don't buy that particular argument. The dinosaurs as birds hypothesis has been around since the early 1900s. It was rejected. It got proposed again. Now people like it. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? There are problems with the hypothesis. We simply don't, I think, have enough information to make a firm conclusion. The big problem that we have is we just simply don't have enough fossil material, and the fossil material that we do have is controversial. So we're going to skip all of that sort of stuff and skip all those synapomorphies. And I would just like to talk for a moment about these feathers. I had the good fortune to go to the vertebrate morphology meetings when they were in East Germany a number of, God, it's probably been 20 years ago or something like that. But it was kind of cool because at the vertebrate morphology meetings there was this huge contingent of dinosaur people and bird people, and there was a special symposium on the origin of birds. Scientific meetings are usually pretty tame affairs. Everybody is really civil and pleasant, and you know, you have differences of opinion and it's no big deal, right? But these meetings were different. There were obviously two factions in these meetings, and there was a series of papers, and one group of people are saying, yeah, birds are dinosaurs, and the other group is saying, no, that's bullshit. And 20 years ago is when all this controversy erupted because of all of the feathered dinosaur material that was coming out of China. And yet at that time, all the feathers, none of them were flight feathers, they were all down feathers or these symmetrical sorts of feathers. And of course, that's in the middle of this whole argument about how you get into the air.